The 8-year-old girl's voice cut through the morning silence like a knife through silk, her small hand grabbing the crystal coffee cup just as it touched the millionaire's lips. "Please, don't drink that," Lucy whispered, her green eyes wide, with terror as she stared up at Marcus Wellington, one of the wealthiest men in California. "Your wife put something bad in it. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you." Marcus Wellington had built his empire on reading people, on seeing through lies and detecting deception in boardrooms filled with sharks wearing $1,000 suits. But this morning, as he stood in the marble-floored kitchen of his Malibu mansion, something in the child's trembling voice made him freeze. Lucy Martinez had been their housekeeper's daughter for only 3 weeks, a quiet girl who usually disappeared into the background like a shadow, helping her mother Rosa clean the sprawling estate that overlooked the Pacific Ocean. The coffee cup felt suddenly heavy in Marcus's hand as he stared down at the dark liquid, steam rising from its surface like smoke from a funeral pyre. His wife Catherine stood at the kitchen island, her perfectly manicured fingers wrapped around her own cup, her blonde hair catching the morning sunlight that streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She hadn't moved since Lucy spoke, hadn't even blinked, and that stillness sent a chill down Marcus's spine that had nothing to do with the ocean breeze drifting through the open doors. "Lucy, sweetheart," Catherine said finally, her voice carrying that practiced sweetness she used with children and reporters. "Why would you say such a terrible thing about me?" Her blue eyes remained fixed on the little girl, unblinking like a predator studying its prey. "I would never hurt Marcus. I love him very much." But Lucy didn't back down. Instead, she stepped closer to Marcus, her small frame trembling as she pointed at the coffee cup. "I saw you put the white powder in it when you thought nobody was watching. The same powder you put in the other man's drink last month, the one who got very sick and had to go to the hospital." The kitchen fell silent, except for the distant crash of waves against the cliffs below and the soft hum of the refrigerator. Marcus felt his world tilt on its axis as Lucy's words sank in. Last month, his business partner David Chen had collapsed during a meeting at the house, convulsing and foaming at the mouth before the paramedics rushed him to Cedars-Sinai. The doctor said it was a severe allergic reaction, possibly to something he'd eaten or drunk, but David swore he hadn't consumed anything unusual except the coffee Catherine had served him in this very kitchen. Catherine's laugh was like breaking glass. "Marcus, you can't possibly believe this child's wild imagination. She's been watching too many crime shows with her mother." She took a step toward Lucy, her smile never wavering, but her eyes growing colder. "Little girls sometimes make up stories for attention, don't they, Lucy?" Marcus watched his wife's face, studying the micro-expressions he'd learned to read during decades of high-stakes negotiations. The slight tightening around her eyes, the way her left hand clenched into a fist at her side, the almost imperceptible twitch of her jaw muscle. These were tells he'd seen in corporate boardrooms when someone was caught in a lie, but seeing them on Catherine's face made his stomach lurch like he was falling from a great height. "Lucy," Marcus said softly, kneeling down so he was at eye level with the girl, "are you absolutely certain about what you saw?" The child nodded vigorously, tears streaming down her cheeks. "She keeps the powder in a little bottle hidden behind the olive oil in the pantry. She thinks nobody sees her. But I was helping Mama clean the shelves yesterday, and I saw her put it back there. When I asked Mama what it was, she said she didn't know and told me never to touch it." Marcus's blood felt like ice water in his veins. He glanced at Catherine, whose face had gone pale beneath her carefully applied makeup. "Show me," he said, to Lucy, his voice barely above a whisper. "Marcus, this is ridiculous," Catherine snapped, her composure finally cracking. "You're going to let a child's fantasy turn you against your own wife, against the woman who stood by your side for 5 years." But Marcus was already following Lucy toward the walk-in pantry, his heart hammering against his ribs like a caged bird desperate for freedom. The little girl pointed to the top shelf, where bottles of expensive olive oil and aged balsamic vinegar stood in neat rows. Marcus reached behind the largest bottle, and his fingers closed around something small and cylindrical. He pulled out a tiny glass vial filled with white crystalline powder, no bigger than his thumb, but heavy with implications that could destroy everything he thought he knew about his life. The vial was unmarked, but Marcus recognized the type of container from his college chemistry classes decades ago. It was the kind used to store concentrated compounds, substances that were potent in small doses. His hands shook as he held it up to the light, watching the powder shift like tiny diamonds against the glass. "Catherine," he said, turning to face his wife, "what is this?" She was backing toward the kitchen's rear entrance, her face a mask of barely controlled panic. "I don't know what that is, or how it got there. Maybe Rosa put it there. Maybe Lucy's lying to cause trouble because she doesn't like me." "Mama would never do that," Lucy said fiercely, stepping protectively in front of Marcus. "And I'm not lying. I saw you measure it out with a tiny spoon and stir it into his coffee while he was reading his phone. The same way you did with the other man." Marcus felt reality shifting beneath his feet, like sand in an earthquake. If Lucy was telling the truth, if Catherine had been poisoning him and possibly David, then every moment of the past 5 years had been a lie. Every kiss, every shared meal, every whispered word of love had been part of an elaborate deception designed to kill him slowly and steal his fortune. He pulled out his phone with trembling fingers and dialed 911, his eyes never leaving Catherine's face. She'd stopped backing away and stood frozen by the door, her perfect facade finally crumbling to reveal something cold and calculating underneath. 911, what's your emergency?" The operator's voice seemed to come from very far away. "This is Marcus Wellington at 1247 Pacific Coast Highway in Malibu. I need police and paramedics immediately. I believe my wife has been trying to poison me." Catherine's mask slipped completely then, and for the first time since he'd known her, Marcus saw who she really was. The loving wife, the devoted partner, the woman who'd comforted him through his father's death and celebrated his business victories, had been an elaborate performance. The person standing before him now had eyes like a shark's, flat and emotionless, calculating her next move. "You stupid little brat," Catherine hissed at Lucy, her voice dripping with venom. "You've ruined everything." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Marcus instinctively stepped in front of Lucy, shielding her from his wife's fury. "The police are on their way, Catherine. Don't make this worse than it already is." She laughed, a sound devoid of warmth or sanity. "Worse? Marcus, you have no idea how much worse this is going to get. You think I'm the only one? You think this ends with me?" The words hit him like a physical blow. "What do you mean?" But Catherine was already reaching into her purse, and Marcus saw the glint of metal in her hand. "You were supposed to die 6 months ago," she said, pulling out a small silver revolver. "The plan was perfect. Slow poisoning, a gradual decline that would look like a rare illness. But you're too stubborn to die properly. And now that little, which has ruined 5 years of careful work." Lucy screamed, and Marcus grabbed her, pulling her behind the kitchen island as Catherine raised the gun. The marble countertop exploded in a shower of chips and dust as the first bullet struck where Marcus's head had been moments before. "You can't hide forever," Catherine called out, her voice eerily calm. "And even if you survive this, you'll never be safe. There are others, Marcus, people who want you dead for reasons you can't even imagine." Marcus's mind raced as he held Lucy tight against his chest, feeling her small body shaking with terror. He could hear sirens in the distance, growing louder, but Catherine was between them and the main exit. The kitchen's rear door led to the garden and the cliff path, but that would mean exposing themselves to her line of fire. "Who else, Catherine?" Marcus shouted over the kitchen island. "Who else wants me dead?" Another gunshot rang out, shattering the coffee maker and sending hot liquid and glass across the floor. "Your dear friend Richard Morrison, for one. Did you really think that real estate deal in Dubai was legitimate? You cost him $40 million and made him look like a fool in front of some very dangerous people. People who don't forgive or forget." Marcus felt his world collapse further. Richard had been his closest friend for 15 years. The best man at his wedding to Catherine, the godfather to Marcus's nephew. If Richard was involved in this conspiracy, then Marcus had been living in a house of cards that was finally tumbling down around him. "And your lovely business partner's wife, Jennifer Chen," Catherine continued, reloading her weapon with practiced efficiency. "She blames you for David's condition. He's been in a coma for 3 weeks now, thanks to the dose I gave him. She hired me to make sure you joined him." The sirens were getting closer, and Marcus could hear the sound of multiple vehicles screeching to a halt in his driveway. But Catherine seemed unconcerned, as if she'd planned for this possibility. "Lucy," Marcus whispered, "when I say run, you go straight to the back door and don't stop until you reach the police. Understand?" The little girl nodded, her eyes wide with fear, but filled with determination that reminded Marcus of his own childhood, when he'd learned to face down bullies in the schoolyard. "Here's what's going to happen," Catherine announced, stepping around the island with the gun trained on Marcus. "You're going to drink that coffee, and then you're going to write a suicide note explaining how guilty you feel about David's condition, how you can't live with what you've done. And if you don't, I'll kill this little girl first and make you watch." Marcus rose slowly from behind the counter, his hands raised in surrender. "Let her go, Catherine. She's just a child. This is between us." "No," Catherine said, her finger tightening on the trigger. "She's a witness. She's seen too much and she knows too much. After you're dead, I'll take care of her and her mother. A terrible accident, perhaps. A gas leak in their apartment." The front door exploded inward as police officers swarmed into the house, their voices echoing through the mansion as they called out commands. Catherine's head snapped toward the sound, and in that moment of distraction, Marcus made his move. He lunged forward, tackling Catherine around the waist and sending them both crashing to the floor. The gun skittered across the marble tiles as they struggled, Catherine's perfectly manicured nails raking across Marcus's face as she fought like a cornered animal. "Run, Lucy!" Marcus shouted as he grappled with his wife, trying to pin her arms. "Get the police!" The little girl didn't hesitate. She sprinted toward the back door as fast as her legs could carry her, her small voice crying out for help as she ran through the garden toward the sound of sirens and shouting officers. Catherine managed to break free from Marcus's grip and scrambled toward the gun, her dress torn and her blonde hair wild with fury. But as her fingers closed around the weapon, the kitchen filled with armed police officers, their weapons drawn and trained on her. "Drop the gun! Drop it now!" Catherine turned toward the officers, the revolver in her hand, and for a moment Marcus thought she might surrender. Instead, she smiled, the same beautiful smile that had charmed him at their first meeting 5 years ago. "You'll never be safe, Marcus," she said softly, raising the gun toward her own temple. "They'll keep coming until you're dead. And when you are, remember that this is all your fault." The gunshot echoed through the kitchen like thunder, and Marcus watched in horror as the woman he'd loved and trusted collapsed to the floor in a pool of blood and broken dreams. The aftermath came in waves of chaos and confusion. Paramedics rushed past Marcus as he sat on the garden steps, a blanket around his shoulders and his hands shaking uncontrollably. Lucy stood nearby with her mother Rosa, both of them giving statements to detectives while crime scene photographers documented the destruction of Marcus's perfect life. Detective Maria Santos knelt beside Marcus, her dark eyes filled with sympathy. "Mr. Wellington, I know this is difficult, but we need to understand what happened here. Can you walk me through the events leading up to Mrs. Wellington's death?" Marcus looked up at the detective, then across the garden to where Lucy stood holding her mother's hand. The little girl had saved his life with her courage and honesty, and now she was trying to be brave for the adults around her, even though she'd witnessed something no child should ever see. "It started with a cup of coffee," Marcus said quietly, his voice hoarse from shock and adrenaline, "and a little girl who was brave enough to tell the truth when everyone else would have stayed silent." As the sun climbed higher over the Pacific Ocean, casting long shadows across the crime scene, Marcus realized that this was only the beginning. Catherine's final words echoed in his mind like a curse. "They'll keep coming until you're dead." If his wife had been telling the truth, if there really were others who wanted him dead, then Lucy's warning about the poisoned coffee had saved him from more than just one attempt on his life. It had exposed a conspiracy that went deeper than marriage, deeper than money, and deeper than anything Marcus had ever imagined possible in his carefully ordered world. Detective Santos closed her notebook and stood up, her expression grave. "Mr. Wellington, based on what we've heard today and the evidence we've collected, I think you need to consider the possibility that your wife wasn't acting alone. We're going to need to investigate everyone in your inner circle, every business associate, every friend who had access to your home." Marcus nodded, though the thought of suspecting everyone he'd ever trusted made him feel sick. "Detective, the little girl who warned me, Lucy Martinez and her mother Rosa. I want them protected. If Catherine was telling the truth about others, being involved, they could be in danger for what they've witnessed. We've already arranged for protection," Detective Santos assured him, "but Mr. Wellington, you need protection too. Until we know the full extent of this conspiracy, you're not safe anywhere." As if summoned by her words, Rosa Martinez approached them, her arm around Lucy's shoulders. The housekeeper's eyes were red from crying, but her voice was steady when she spoke. "Mr. Wellington, I need to tell you something I should have mentioned before." Rosa glanced nervously at Detective Santos, then back at Marcus. "Last week, I saw Mrs. Wellington meeting with a man in the garden. I didn't recognize him, but they were arguing about money, about how long things were taking. I thought it was about the charity auction she was organizing, but now—" "Can you describe this man?" Detective Santos asked, pulling out her notebook again. "Tall, expensive suit, dark hair with gray at the temples. He had a scar on his left hand right here." Rosa indicated the space between her thumb and forefinger. "And he drove a black Mercedes with tinted windows." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. He knew only one person who matched that description perfectly. Richard Morrison, his oldest friend and business partner, the man Catherine had named as one of the conspirators, the man who had access to Marcus's home, his business, and his trust. "Detective," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper, "I think I know who that man is." As the crime scene team continued their work and the afternoon sun began to sink, toward the horizon, Marcus stared out at the ocean and wondered how many people he'd trusted had been planning his death. Lucy's courage had saved his life today, but Catherine's words haunted him like a prophecy. "They'll keep coming until you're dead." He pulled out his phone and scrolled through his contacts, looking at names of people he'd considered friends, business partners, allies. How many of them were really enemies? How many of them had been waiting for news of his death? And most importantly, how was he going to stay alive long enough to find out the truth? The little girl who had warned him about the poisoned coffee had given him more than just his life back. She'd given him a chance to fight back against enemies he'd never known existed. But as Marcus Wellington sat in the ruins of his perfect life, surrounded by police officers and medical examiners, he realized that the real battle was just beginning. The sun was setting over the Pacific when Detective Santos received a phone call that changed everything. Marcus watched her face grow pale as she listened to whoever was on the other end of the line, her expression shifting from concern to alarm to something approaching fear. "Mr. Wellington," she said, hanging up the phone and turning to face him. "We need to get you out of here immediately." "That was my captain. Richard Morrison was found dead in his office an hour ago, apparent suicide. He left a note confessing to the conspiracy against you, but naming other people involved. People who are still alive and who now know that their plan has been exposed." Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. How many others? According to Morrison's note, at least 6 people wanted you dead. Business rivals, former partners. You'd crossed, even someone in your own family. Detective Santos gestured toward the unmarked cars pulling into the driveway. "We're taking you to a safe house until we can arrest the remaining conspirators." "And Mr. Wellington," Morrison's note mentioned something else. "Your wife wasn't supposed to kill you today. This whole thing was rushed because someone found out about the investigation." "What investigation?" Marcus asked, though he suspected. He already knew the answer. "Someone has been investigating your wife for weeks, trying to prove she was slowly poisoning you. Someone who cared enough about your well-being to hire a private detective and gather evidence." Detective Santos looked toward Rosa and Lucy, who were being escorted to their own protective detail. "Someone found out about the plan to kill you today and tried to warn you, but couldn't reach you in time." Marcus felt a spark of hope pierce through the darkness of betrayal and conspiracy. "Who?" "Your nephew, James Wellington. He's been suspicious of your wife since your father's funeral last year. He noticed how much your health declined whenever you spent time with her, and he started documenting everything. He's the one who called us this morning and said he was afraid something was going to happen to you today." And as the protective convoy prepared to leave the mansion, Marcus took one last look at the kitchen, where his life had almost ended, and his eyes had been opened to the truth. The coffee cup still sat on the counter, its deadly contents now evidence, in a case that would probably take months to fully unravel. Lucy Martinez appeared at his side, having broken away from her mother's protective embrace. "Mr. Wellington," she said, looking up at him with those wise green eyes that had seen too much for someone so young, "are you going to be okay?" Marcus knelt down and looked into her face. This brave little girl who had risked everything to save a man she barely knew. "I'm going to be okay because of you, Lucy. You saved my life today." She smiled then, the first real smile he'd seen from her since the nightmare began. "Mama always says that telling the truth is the right thing to do, even when it's scary." "Your mama is very wise," Marcus said, pulling the child into a gentle hug. "And you are very brave. I'm going to make sure you and your mother are safe, I promise." As the convoy pulled away from the mansion, Marcus looked back at the place he'd called home for 5 years, the place where he'd unknowingly been marked for death by people he'd trusted. But he also thought about Lucy's courage, about his nephew's loyalty, about Detective Santos's dedication to protecting him. Catherine had been wrong about one thing. Marcus wasn't alone in this fight. He had allies, people who cared about him enough to risk their own safety to keep him alive. And as long as he had people like that in his corner, he wouldn't give up. He would find every person involved in the conspiracy. He would bring them to justice, and he would make sure that no one else suffered the way David Chen and his family had suffered. The battle was far from over, but for the first time since Lucy had grabbed his coffee cup that morning, Marcus Wellington felt like he might actually win. The safe house was a modest two-story home in a quiet neighborhood in Pasadena, a world away from the oceanfront mansion where Marcus had nearly lost his life. As he sat in the living room with Detective Santos and FBI agent David Park, who had joined the investigation due to its multi-state implications, Marcus tried to process the magnitude of what he'd learned. According to Morrison's confession, Agent Park said, spreading photographs across the coffee table, this conspiracy has been active for almost 2 years. It started when you testified against Senator Harold Graves in the corruption trial. Graves had connections to organized crime, and when your testimony helped send him to prison, you became a target. Marcus stared at the photographs, mugshots of men and women he didn't recognize, mixed with pictures of people he knew well. His business attorney, Margaret Stevens, his personal trainer, Robert Kim, even his housekeeper before Rosa, a woman named Patricia Voss, who had quit suddenly 6 months ago claiming family emergency. Patricia was feeding them information about your routines, your health, your habits, Detective Santos explained. She reported back on everything from what you ate for breakfast to what medications you took. When she left, they needed someone inside your house, so they arranged for Catherine to hire Rosa and Lucy as replacements. But Rosa and Lucy aren't involved, Marcus said quickly, protective instincts flaring. No, they're innocent, Agent Park confirmed. In fact, Rosa's presence may have saved your life. Catherine couldn't risk being as obvious with her poisoning attempts when there was another adult in the house regularly. That's why the dosage was so small, why it was taking so long. She had to be subtle. Marcus rubbed his temples, feeling a headache building behind his eyes. So how many people wanted me dead? 8 confirmed conspirators, Detective Santos said grimly. Morrison named them all before he killed himself. 3 are already in custody. 2 more died in what appear to be murder-suicides within hours of Morrison's death, and we're still hunting for the remaining 3. They're eliminating witnesses, Agent Park added. Classic organized crime behavior when a conspiracy is exposed. They're cutting loose ends to prevent anyone from talking. A chill ran down Marcus's spine. Am I safe here? For now, Detective Santos said, but we think it would be best if you disappeared for a while. Complete identity change, relocation to another state, the full witness protection treatment. At least until we can round up the remaining conspirators. Marcus shook his head. I can't do that. I have responsibilities, businesses to run, people depending on me. And what about Lucy and Rosa? If these people are willing to kill to cover their tracks, won't they go after the witnesses? We've already relocated the Martinez family, Agent Park assured him. They're in protective custody in a location even we don't know. Only the U.S. Marshals handling their case have that information. The thought of Lucy and her mother being forced to abandon their lives because they'd helped him made Marcus sick with guilt. A little girl who'd shown incredible courage was now living in hiding because she'd chosen to do the right thing. There's something else, Detective Santos said, her voice hesitant. Your nephew James wants to see you. He's been calling every hour since the incident this morning. He says he has more information about the conspiracy, things he didn't put in his initial report to the police. Marcus felt a surge of gratitude toward James, the young man he'd helped raise after his brother's death in a car accident 10 years ago. James had always been perceptive, always asking the right questions, always looking out for Marcus in ways that reminded him of his late brother. Can you bring him here safely? We already have, Agent Park said. He's in the kitchen waiting for us to finish briefing you on the security situation. When James Wellington walked into the living room, Marcus saw his own eyes looking back at him from a face that resembled his late brother's. James was 28 now, a successful architect with his own firm. But in moments of stress, he still looked like the 18-year-old kid who'd come to live with Marcus after losing his parents. "Uncle Marcus," James said, crossing the room in 3 quick strides and pulling him into a fierce hug. "When I couldn't reach you this morning, I thought I was too late. I thought they'd already. I'm alive because you cared enough to investigate," Marcus said, holding his nephew tight. "Detective Santos told me you've been documenting Catherine's behavior for months." James pulled back, his face grim. "I should have done more sooner. I should have confronted you directly instead of trying to gather evidence first. But I knew you loved her, and I was afraid you wouldn't believe me without proof." "What made you suspicious in the first place?" James sat down across from Marcus, his hands clenched together. "Remember Dad's funeral last year? How Catherine kept insisting you needed to eat something, kept bringing you food and drinks even though you weren't hungry. I noticed that every time you consumed something she gave you, you'd get sick within a few hours. Headaches, nausea, fatigue." Marcus remembered those days, how he'd attributed his illness to grief and stress. "You think she was testing different substances on me?" "I think she was calibrating the dosage," James said, "finding the right amount to make you sick without killing you immediately. And there were other things. Phone calls she'd take in private, always stepping outside or going to another room. Credit card statements that showed purchases from chemical supply companies under fake business names." Agent Park leaned forward. "What kind of purchases?" "Laboratory equipment. Digital scales precise to the milligram. Substances that are legal to purchase, but deadly in the right combinations." James pulled out his phone and showed them a series of photographs. "I followed her to a storage unit she was renting under an assumed name. These pictures show what was inside." Marcus stared at the images on James's phone, feeling sick. Shelves lined with small bottles and vials, each labeled with scientific names he didn't recognize. Digital scales, measuring spoons, even a small centrifuge for separating compounds. "She had been planning this for a long time," Detective Santos said, studying the photographs. "This level of preparation suggests extensive knowledge of chemistry and toxicology." "Catherine has a PhD in biochemistry," Marcus said quietly. "She told me she'd given up her research career to focus on charity work after we got married, but she clearly never stopped using her knowledge." James's expression darkened. "Uncle Marcus, there's something else. Something I discovered just yesterday that made me realize the danger was immediate." "What?" "I hacked into her email account. She was communicating with someone using encrypted messages, but I managed to decode a few of them. They were planning to accelerate the timeline. Instead of a slow poisoning that would take months to kill you, they were going to give you a massive dose today that would cause what looked like a sudden heart attack." Marcus felt the room spin around him. "How did they know you were investigating?" "I think I made a mistake," James admitted, his voice heavy with guilt. "I hired a private detective to help gather evidence, but I think he was compromised. Yesterday morning, I got a call from someone claiming to be him, asking me to meet at a warehouse to review new evidence he'd found. When I got there, 3 men tried to kidnap me." Agent Park's eyes sharpened. "What happened?" "I managed to get away and call the police, but they were gone by the time officers arrived. That's when I realized the conspiracy was bigger than just Catherine, and that they knew I was onto them. I tried calling you all morning to warn you, but your phone kept going straight to voicemail." Marcus remembered now. Catherine had suggested he turn off his phone during breakfast to avoid being disturbed by business calls. She'd wanted to ensure he couldn't be warned about what was coming. "The private detective you hired," Detective Santos asked, "what was his name?" "Michael Rodriguez, Rodriguez Investigations. He came highly recommended, had excellent reviews online." James pulled out a business card. But when I tried to call his office after the warehouse incident, the number was disconnected. Agent Park took the card and studied it. This is a sophisticated operation. They created a fake detective agency, built an online presence with false reviews, and used it to monitor anyone who might be investigating their activities. We're dealing with professionals. The weight of the conspiracy pressed down on Marcus. Like a physical force, these weren't random criminals or opportunistic killers. They were organized, well-funded, and had been planning his death with military precision. "James," Marcus said, gripping his nephew's shoulder, "I need you to disappear, too. If they tried to kidnap you once, they'll try again." "I'm not leaving you to face this alone," James said firmly. "Besides, they're not going to stop coming after our family until we expose all of them. Running away just gives them time to regroup and try again." Detective Santos and Agent Park exchanged glances. "Actually," Agent Park said slowly, "your nephew might be right. Instead of hiding, we could use you both as bait to draw out the remaining conspirators." Marcus felt his blood chill. "Absolutely not. James has already risked enough." "Uncle Marcus, listen to him," James said urgently. "These people have been planning your death for 2 years. They've killed at least 3 people already to cover their tracks. They're not going to give up just because this attempt failed. The only way to end this is to get them all." Agent Park pulled out a tablet and showed them a map of Los Angeles, with red dots marking various locations. "We know the remaining 3 conspirators are still in the area. Margaret Stevens, your business attorney, was spotted at LAX this afternoon, trying to book a flight to a non-extradition country. Robert Kim, your personal trainer, withdrew $200,000 in cash from multiple accounts yesterday. And Jennifer Chen, David's wife, purchased a rifle and ammunition 3 hours ago using a fake ID." "Jennifer bought a gun?" Marcus couldn't hide the shock in his voice. He'd known Jennifer for almost a decade, had attended her wedding to David, had held their newborn daughter at the christening. "Yes. According to Morrison's confession, Jennifer blames you for David's condition. She believes that if you hadn't involved him in your business dealings, he never would have become a target. She's not thinking rationally." The room fell silent as Marcus processed this information. Jennifer Chen, grieving wife and mother, had purchased a rifle and was somewhere in Los Angeles planning to kill him. Margaret Stevens, the woman who'd handled his legal affairs for 8 years, was trying to flee the country. Robert Kim, who'd trained him 3 times a week for 2 years, had liquidated his assets and disappeared into the wind. "What's the plan?" Marcus asked finally. Agent Park smiled grimly. "We're going to give them exactly what they want, a chance to finish the job." The plan was audacious in its simplicity and terrifying in its implications. Agent Park spread blueprints across the dining room table of the safe house, his finger tracing routes through Marcus's downtown office building like a general planning a military campaign. The idea was to make Marcus visible, to let the remaining conspirators know exactly where he would be and when, then surround the location with enough federal agents to ensure the trap closed around them instead of him. "Your office building has 12 floors and 4 possible exit routes," Agent Park explained, his voice steady despite the gravity of what they were proposing. "We'll position agents on every floor, in every stairwell, monitoring every entrance and exit. You'll go to your office tomorrow morning as if nothing has happened, conduct business as usual, and wait for them to make their move." Marcus studied the blueprints, his mind racing through the implications. Wellington Enterprises occupied the top 3 floors of the building, with his personal office on the 12th floor offering panoramic views of downtown Los Angeles. It was a location he'd chosen specifically because it felt safe, isolated from street-level threats, accessible only through controlled elevators and security checkpoints. "What about innocent people?" Marcus asked. My employees, other businesses in the building, security guards who have nothing to do with this. Detective Santos looked up from her own set of documents. We'll coordinate with building security to ensure minimal civilian presence. Skeleton crews only, essential personnel move to off-site locations for the day. Anyone who remains will be briefed on the situation and given protective gear. James paced near the window, his architectural training evident as he studied the building schematics with a critical eye. Uncle Marcus, this building wasn't designed for this kind of operation. There are too many variables, too many places where things could go wrong. What if they don't come alone? What if they have explosives? The question hung in the air like a death sentence. Agent Park's expression remained impassive, but Marcus could see the calculations running behind his eyes. Intelligence suggests they're working independently now. Morrison's death fractured the conspiracy, and the survivors are likely operating alone or in small groups. They don't have the resources or coordination for a large-scale attack. Likely isn't the same as certain, James pointed out. No, Agent Park admitted. It's not. But Mr. Wellington, these people aren't going to stop hunting you. Jennifer Chen has already made 2 attempts to get close to locations where you might be. She was spotted outside your nephew's apartment building this morning and near the hospital where David is being treated. She's escalating, becoming more desperate and more dangerous. Marcus felt a chill run through him at the thought of Jennifer, grief-stricken and armed, stalking his family members. What about David? Is he safe? We've moved him to a secure medical facility, Detective Santos said. His condition is stable but unchanged. The doctors say the poison damaged his nervous system, but they're hopeful he'll eventually regain consciousness. The weight of David's condition pressed down on Marcus like a physical force. His business partner and friend was lying in a coma because Marcus had unknowingly made enemies who were willing to destroy innocent lives to get to him. How many other people had suffered because of conspiracies and vendettas he'd never even known existed? There's something else, Agent Park said, pulling out a thick file folder. We've been analyzing the financial records Morrison provided before his death. The money funding this conspiracy didn't come from the people directly involved. Someone else has been bankrolling the operation, someone with significant resources, who's managed to stay completely in the shadows. Marcus leaned forward, studying the financial documents. Bank transfers, shell company records, cryptocurrency transactions that painted a picture of sophisticated money laundering designed to hide the true source of funding. How much money are we talking about? Over $3 million in past 2 years, Agent Park said grimly. Money used to pay Catherine, to fund Morrison's gambling debts and buy his cooperation, to establish false identities and purchase equipment. This isn't a crime of passion or a simple murder for hire. Someone has invested serious capital in ensuring your death. James stopped pacing and turned to face them. Uncle Marcus, think about it. Who benefits most from your death? Who gains? Access to your companies, your assets, your business relationships? The question hit Marcus like a sledgehammer to the chest. In his will, primary beneficiaries included James, several charities, and his business partners, who would inherit controlling interests in various ventures. But there were also provisions for hostile takeover protections, golden parachute clauses, and succession planning that would benefit specific individuals if he died under certain circumstances. The succession clauses, Marcus said slowly, pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. If I die before the merger with Tanaka Industries is finalized, control of the combined companies passes to a board of trustees rather than to Hiroshi. Tanaka, directly. Agent Park's eyes sharpened. Who's on that board? Marcus felt his mouth go dry as he recited the names. Senator Patricia Wild from the Banking Committee, Federal Judge Harrison Blackwood, CEO Amanda Sterling from Sterling International, and He stopped, the final name sticking in his throat like poison. "And?" Detective Santos prompted. "And Catherine Wellington, as my surviving spouse." The room fell silent, except for the distant hum of traffic outside the safe house. The magnitude of the conspiracy became clear in that moment. Catherine hadn't just been trying to kill him for money or revenge. She'd been positioning herself to control one of the largest business mergers in recent history, a deal that would create a multinational corporation worth billions of dollars. "The merger documents," James said urgently. "Uncle Marcus, where are the original contracts? If Catherine had access to them, she could have altered the succession clauses without anyone knowing." Marcus's blood turned to ice. "They're in my office safe. Catherine knew the combination, because I trusted her to handle my personal financial documents when I traveled." Agent Park was already reaching for his phone. "We need to get to those documents immediately. If she altered the succession planning, it could invalidate the entire merger and trigger a financial crisis that goes way beyond your personal situation." Detective Santos stood up, checking her weapon. "This changes the entire scope of the operation. We're not just dealing with a murder conspiracy anymore. This is corporate espionage and fraud on an international scale." The drive to Wellington Enterprises took place in a convoy of unmarked federal vehicles, with Marcus and James riding in an armored SUV surrounded by agents who treated every intersection like a potential ambush site. The normally familiar streets of downtown Los Angeles felt alien and threatening, every pedestrian a possible assassin, every parked car a potential bomb. "Stay close to me," Agent Park instructed as they pulled into the underground parking garage. "We go straight to your office, retrieve the documents, and get out. No detours, no unnecessary risks." The building felt eerily quiet as they rode the elevator to the 12th floor. Marcus's usual security team had been replaced by federal agents, and the absence of familiar faces made him feel like a stranger in his own company. When the elevator doors opened onto the executive floor, Marcus saw that every desk was empty, every office dark except for his own. "The documents are in here," Marcus said, leading them toward his corner office. The space that had once represented the pinnacle of his professional achievement now felt like a trap waiting to be sprung. The safe was hidden behind a painting of the Pacific Coast Highway, the same stretch of road where his Malibu mansion sat overlooking the ocean. As Marcus input the combination, he wondered if he would ever feel safe in that house again, if he would ever be able to look at the ocean without remembering the taste of poisoned coffee and the sound of gunshots in his kitchen. The safe opened with a soft electronic beep, revealing stacks of documents, backup hard drives, and several jewelry boxes containing family heirlooms. Marcus reached for the merger contracts, thick folders bound in legal tape that represented months of negotiation and planning. "These are them," he said, pulling out the documents and handing them to Agent Park. "The succession clauses should be on pages 47 through 53. Agent Park flipped through the pages, his expression growing darker with each line. He read, "Mr. Wellington, according to these documents, if you die before the merger is finalized, Catherine Wellington doesn't just become a trustee. She becomes the sole controlling entity with the power to approve or reject the merger entirely." Marcus felt the floor drop out from under him. "That's not what I agreed to. The original contract specified a board of trustees with shared authority." These have been altered," Detective Santos confirmed, examining the pages under a magnifying glass. "You can see where text has been removed and new clauses inserted." "The alterations are sophisticated, but they're definitely there." James was studying the documents over Agent Park's shoulder. "Uncle Marcus, if these contracts are legally binding as written, Catherine would have gained control of a merger worth $12 billion. Even if she'd been caught and arrested for your murder, she could have executed the merger before facing trial. The scope of the conspiracy finally became clear. Catherine hadn't just been planning to kill him for inheritance money. She'd been positioning herself to control one of the largest corporate mergers in history, with the power to approve or reject a deal that would affect thousands of jobs and billions of dollars in international commerce. "There's something else," Agent Park said, continuing to read through the documents. "These altered clauses also give Catherine the authority to dissolve Wellington Enterprises entirely and sell off its assets piecemeal. She could have liquidated your entire company and disappeared with the proceeds." Marcus sank into his desk chair, the weight of betrayal crushing down on him like a physical force. The woman he'd loved and trusted hadn't just wanted him dead. She'd wanted to destroy everything he'd built, everything his father and grandfather had created before him. "Sir," one of the agents posted near the window called out urgently, "we have movement in the building across the street. Possible sniper position on the 18th floor." Agent Park immediately moved to the windows, pulling out binoculars. In scanning the building opposite, "I see her, Jennifer Chen, positioned behind what looks like a high-powered rifle. She's been waiting for us." Detective Santos was already coordinating with the tactical team via radio. "All units, we have a confirmed threat. Target is armed and in position. Civilian evacuation protocols are in effect immediately." Marcus stood up from his chair, moving away from the windows as instructed, but he couldn't help stealing a glance across the street. Through the glass windows of the opposite building, he could make out a figure in dark clothing crouched behind what appeared to be a rifle scope, the barrel aimed directly at his office. "She's been planning this," James said, his voice tight with fear. "She knew we'd come here for the documents. Someone told her." Agent Park lowered his binoculars, his expression grim. "The question is who? The safe house location was classified. This operation was compartmentalized, and only a handful of people knew we'd be coming here today." The implications hit Marcus like a punch to the stomach. "You think there's someone else involved? Someone we haven't identified yet?" Before Agent Park could answer, Marcus's office phone began ringing. The sound was jarring in the tense silence, and everyone in the room froze. The caller ID showed an unknown number with a local area code. "Answer it," Detective Santos instructed, gesturing for the technical team to begin tracing the call. "Keep them talking as long as possible." Marcus picked up the phone, his hand trembling slightly. "Marcus Wellington." "Hello, Marcus." The voice was familiar, warm and professional, tinged with what sounded like genuine concern. "I hear you've been having quite a day." Marcus's blood turned to ice as he recognized the speaker. "Margaret? Margaret Stevens?" His business attorney's laugh was soft and bitter. "Surprised to hear from me? I suppose you thought I'd fled the country by now, but I couldn't leave without saying goodbye properly." Agent Park was frantically gesturing for Marcus to keep her talking, while technical specialists worked to trace the call. "Margaret, where are you? We can help you. This doesn't have to end badly." Oh, Marcus, always the optimist, always, believing that money and lawyers can fix any problem. Margaret's voice hardened. "But some problems can't be fixed. Some betrayals cut too deep to heal." "What betrayal?" "Margaret, I trusted you with my legal affairs for 8 years. I've never done anything to hurt you. Haven't you?" The anger in her voice was palpable now. "Do you remember the Henderson case, Marcus? 3 years ago, when you asked me to find a way around environmental regulations for your mining operation in Nevada?" Marcus did remember. Henderson Mining had been a complex deal involving federal land use permits and environmental impact studies. Margaret had found legal loopholes that allowed the project to proceed, despite concerns from environmental groups. "What about it? What about it?" Margaret's voice rose to nearly a shout. That mining operation contaminated the groundwater for 3 counties, Marcus. Thousands of people got sick. Children developed cancer. My own daughter was one of them. The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He remembered Margaret taking extended leave about 2 years ago, citing family medical issues, but she'd never explained the details. Margaret, I had no idea. The environmental reports said the operation was safe. The reports lied, and you chose to believe them because it was profitable. My daughter Emma died 6 months ago from leukemia caused by contaminated water from your mine. She was 8 years old, Marcus. 8 years old. Marcus felt sick, the room spinning around him as the full scope of Margaret's motivation became clear. Margaret, I'm so sorry. If I had known the reports were falsified, I never would have proceeded with the project. But you did proceed. And when the lawsuits started coming, when families like mine tried to hold your company accountable, you fought us every step of the way. You used your lawyers and your money to bury the truth and protect your profits. Agent Park was making urgent gestures, indicating that they'd traced the call to a location within the building. Margaret wasn't calling from a distant location. She was somewhere in Wellington Enterprises, possibly just floors below them. Margaret, where are you? Marcus asked, trying to keep his voice steady. I'm in your conference room on the 10th floor, Marcus. The same room where you celebrated the success of the Henderson project, while my daughter was getting her first round of chemotherapy. Her voice became eerily calm. I wanted you to know why you're going to die today. I wanted you to understand that this isn't just about money or business. This is about justice for Emma and all the other children whose lives you destroyed. The line went dead, and Agent Park immediately began coordinating with the tactical teams. All units, suspect is on the 10th floor, conference room. Approach. With extreme caution, assume she's armed and explosive devices are possible. Detective Santos grabbed Marcus by the arm. We're leaving now. Emergency stairwell straight down to the parking garage. No stops, no hesitations. But as they moved toward the stairwell, another complication arose. The building's fire alarm system activated, filling the air with deafening klaxons and automated warnings about emergency evacuation procedures. Emergency lighting kicked in, bathing the hallways in an eerie red glow that made everything look like a scene from a nightmare. This is deliberate, Agent Park shouted over the noise. She's trying to force us into the stairwells where she can control our movement. They reached the emergency stairwell and began descending, but by the 5th floor, it became clear that Margaret had anticipated their route. The stairwell door to the 4th floor hung open, and the scent of something chemical and acrid drifted up from below. Gas, one of the tactical agents reported through his radio. Some kind of chemical agent in the lower stairwells. We need to find an alternative route. Agent Park made a quick decision. Back up to the 8th floor. We'll take the service. Elevator to the parking level and bypass the contaminated areas. Miti. As they climbed back up the stairs, Marcus couldn't help but think about Margaret's daughter Emma, an 8-year-old girl whose death had set in motion the conspiracy that had nearly cost him his own life. The mining project that had seemed like such a business triumph had been built on falsified reports and environmental destruction that killed innocent children. Agent Park, Marcus said as they reached the 8th floor, I need to see the real environmental reports from the Henderson project. If Margaret's telling the truth about the contamination, if my company really was responsible for those deaths, then I need to make it right. Mr. Wellington, we can address that after we get you to safety, Agent Park replied. But Marcus could see in his eyes that the agent was already making the same connections Margaret had made. The mining operation, the cover-up, the legal battles that had bankrupted families while Wellington Enterprises protected its profits. The service elevator descended slowly, each floor marked by a soft electronic chime that seemed unnaturally loud in the emergency-lit building. When they reached the parking level, They found Margaret Stevens waiting for them. She stood near Marcus's reserved parking space, her professional business attire incongruous with the military-grade explosive vest strapped across her chest. In her hands, she held a dead man's switch, her finger wrapped around the trigger that would detonate enough plastic explosive to bring down half the parking garage. "Hello, Marcus," she said calmly, as if they were meeting for a routine legal consultation. "I was hoping we could have a final conversation about the Henderson case." Agent Park immediately signaled for his team to take cover behind concrete pillars, but Margaret raised her voice to address them directly. "Agent Park, Detective Santos, I'd like you to hear this too. I want you to understand exactly who you're protecting." Marcus stepped forward, despite Agent Park's urgent gestures for him to stay back. "Margaret, I understand why you're angry. If the environmental reports were falsified, if Wellington Enterprises was responsible for Emma's death, then I will do everything in my power to make amends. But this isn't the way." "Amends!" Margaret's laugh was hollow and bitter. "Marcus, do you know how many families sued your company over the Henderson contamination? 47 families, including mine. Do you know how many of them received meaningful compensation? 0. Your legal team fought every case, questioned every medical diagnosis, disputed every scientific study that linked the contamination to the health problems." Detective Santos was slowly moving to a position where she might have a clear shot. But Margaret noticed the movement and adjusted her position accordingly. "Detective, I wouldn't recommend that. This switch is very sensitive and I'm feeling quite emotional today." "Margaret," Marcus tried again, "I wasn't personally involved in the litigation strategy. I trusted my legal team to handle the cases appropriately. If they acted unethically, if they prevented legitimate claims from being paid, then I take full responsibility." "Full responsibility," Margaret repeated. "Do you know what full responsibility looks like, Marcus? It looks like my daughter's grave. It looks like 46 other families who lost children, parents, siblings to cancers and organ failures caused by your contaminated water. The weight of those deaths settled on Marcus's shoulders like a mountain. 47 families destroyed by environmental contamination that his company had caused and then covered up. Children like Emma Stevens, 8 years old and dying of leukemia, while his lawyers fought to prevent their families from receiving compensation." "What do you want from me?" Marcus asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Margaret smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "I want you to admit what you did. I want you to confess to Agent Park and Detective Santos that Wellington Enterprises knowingly proceeded with the Henderson project despite environmental concerns, that your company falsified reports to obtain permits, and that your legal team deliberately prevented contamination victims from receiving compensation." Marcus looked around the parking garage, at the federal agents taking cover behind concrete barriers, at James standing pale and terrified near the elevator doors, at Margaret Stevens holding a bomb that could kill them all. The truth was a weapon pointed at his heart, but it was also the only thing that might save everyone's life. "Agent Park," Marcus said loudly, his voice echoing through the garage, "I need to make a statement for the record." "Mr. Wellington, this isn't the time," Agent Park replied, but Marcus held up his hand. "Margaret's right. Wellington Enterprises proceeded with the Henderson mining project despite environmental concerns. We relied on reports that we should have known were inadequate or falsified. When contamination occurred and families began getting sick, our legal strategy was to fight every claim rather than accept responsibility and provide compensation." Marcus's voice broke as he continued. "If children died because of decisions my company made, then I bear responsibility for their deaths." Margaret's grip on the dead man's switch relaxed slightly, and the cover-up, the falsified environmental assessments. Marcus closed his eyes, feeling the weight of his father's legacy crumbling around him. If environmental assessments were falsified, if we knowingly presented false information to regulatory agencies, then yes, Wellington Enterprises engaged in a criminal cover-up. The parking garage fell silent except for the distant sound of sirens from the street above. Margaret Stevens stood motionless for a long moment, tears streaming down her face as she processed Marcus's admission. "Thank you," she said finally. "Thank you for finally telling the truth." She carefully removed her finger from the dead man's switch and set the device on the ground, then raised her hands in surrender. Detective Santos and the tactical team immediately moved in to secure the explosive device and take Margaret into custody. As the bomb squad worked to disarm the vest and Margaret was led away in handcuffs, she turned back to Marcus one final time. "Emma would have been 9 years old next month," she said quietly. "She wanted to be a veterinarian. She loved horses." Marcus watched her disappear into the back of a police car, feeling as if his entire life had been turned inside out in the span of a single day. He'd started the morning as a successful businessman, a pillar of the community, a man who believed he'd built his fortune through hard work and ethical practices. Now he stood in a parking garage, confessing to environmental crimes that had killed children, surrounded by the wreckage of conspiracy and betrayal that reached into every corner of his life. "Uncle Marcus," James said, approaching cautiously. "Are you all right?" Marcus looked at his nephew, seeing his own shame reflected in James's eyes. "No, I don't think I am. James, I need you to contact our corporate attorneys immediately. I want a complete investigation into the Henderson project, and I want to establish a compensation fund for the families affected by the contamination." Agent Park walked over, his expression unreadable. "Mr. Wellington, you understand that your statement here today could be used as evidence in criminal proceedings against you and your company." "I understand," Marcus said, "and I accept the consequences, but Agent Park, there are still people out there who want me dead. Jennifer Chen is still armed and dangerous, and we still don't know who's been funding this conspiracy." As if summoned by his words, the sound of gunfire erupted from the street level above them. Automatic weapons fire, the distinctive crack of sniper rifles, and the chaos of a full-scale firefight between law enforcement and unknown assailants. "They're not done with us yet," Agent Park said grimly, reaching for his radio. "All units, we have active shooters at street level. Parking garage is secure, but we're trapped until the situation above is resolved." Marcus Wellington, millionaire, businessman turned fugitive, stood in the fluorescent-lit parking garage beneath his own building and wondered if he would live long enough to make amends for the sins of his past. The coffee warning that had started this nightmare seemed like a lifetime ago, but he was beginning to understand that Lucy Martinez's courage in speaking the truth was just the beginning of a much larger reckoning. Above them, the battle for his life continued, and Marcus realized that surviving the next few hours would require more than just federal protection. It would require confronting every enemy he'd made, every life he'd damaged, and every truth he'd spent years trying to avoid. The gunfire continued, echoing through the concrete structure like thunder, and Marcus prepared himself for whatever came next. The firefight above them raged for another 20 minutes before the parking garage fell into an eerie silence, broken only by the distant wail of ambulance sirens. Marcus crouched behind a concrete pillar with James, both of them listening, as Agent Park coordinated with tactical teams through his radio. The bomb that Margaret Stevens had carried was now safely disarmed, its components scattered across a metal table where specialists documented every wire and circuit. "Status report." Agent Park spoke into his headset, his voice tense with controlled urgency. "How many shooters? What's the casualty count?" The response crackled through static, but Marcus caught enough words to understand the scope of what they were facing. Multiple gunmen, coordinated attack, at least 3 law enforcement officers wounded, and 1 civilian casualty whose identity hadn't yet been confirmed. Detective Santos approached them, her face grim as she holstered her weapon. "We've got Jennifer Chen in custody. She surrendered after the tactical team surrounded her position in the building across the street. But Marcus, the shooters at street level weren't working with her. This was a separate attack, completely different methodology." Marcus felt his stomach drop. "How many different groups are trying to kill me?" "That's what we're trying to figure out," Agent Park said, ending his radio conversation and turning to face them. The street-level attackers were professionals, possibly military contractors or organized crime enforcers. They used equipment and tactics that go way beyond what we'd expect from grieving family members or disgruntled business partners. James stood up from behind the pillar, his architectural training evident as he studied the parking garage's emergency exits. "Uncle Marcus, if there are professional killers involved, this isn't about the Henderson mining project or Catherine's merger scheme. Someone else wants you dead, and they have serious resources." The implication hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Marcus had assumed that the conspiracy against him was limited to people with personal grievances, business partners seeking financial gain, or family members driven by revenge. But professional assassins suggested something far more dangerous. Connections to organized crime or international interests that viewed him as a threat to much larger operations. "Agent Park," Marcus said slowly, "you mentioned earlier that someone has been funding this conspiracy, someone with access to millions of dollars. Have you identified who that is?" Agent Park exchanged glances with Detective Santos before pulling out a secure tablet. "We've been following the money trail, and it leads to some very disturbing places. The funding appears to originate from a network of shell companies based in the Cayman Islands. But those companies are owned by other shell companies in Switzerland, which are controlled by trusts in Luxembourg." "Money laundering?" James said immediately. "Classic international financial obfuscation. Someone doesn't want their identity connected to payments for your assassination." Detective Santos nodded grimly. "But we did find one connection. The Swiss bank accounts received regular deposits from an American company called Meridian Global Industries. That name mean anything to you?" Marcus felt the blood drain from his face. Meridian Global Industries was a defense contractor specializing in rare earth mineral extraction and advanced materials manufacturing. More importantly, it was owned by Senator Harold Graves, the same man whose corruption trial Marcus had testified in 2 years earlier. "Graves," Marcus whispered. "Senator Harold Graves owns Meridian Global. I testified against him in a federal corruption case involving defense contracts and illegal mining operations on federal land." Agent Park's eyes sharpened with understanding. "What was the outcome of that trial?" "Graves was convicted on 17 counts of bribery, conspiracy, and environmental fraud. He's serving 15 years in federal prison." Marcus felt pieces of a larger puzzle clicking into place. "But before his arrest, he threatened me. He said I'd destroyed his life and that someday I'd pay for what I'd done to him." "Prison doesn't stop organized crime connections," Detective Santos said. "If Graves had ties to criminal organizations before his conviction, he could still be coordinating operations from inside." James was studying something on his phone, his expression growing increasingly alarmed. "Uncle Marcus, look at this. I just searched for recent news about Meridian Global Industries. 3 weeks ago, they announced a hostile takeover attempt against Wellington Enterprises. If you died before you could respond to the takeover bid, the company would be vulnerable to acquisition." The scope of the conspiracy finally became clear. Senator Graves, despite being in federal prison, had been orchestrating a complex plan to destroy Marcus, both personally and financially. The assassination attempts weren't just about revenge for the corruption trial testimony. They were about clearing the way for Meridian Global to acquire Wellington Enterprises and gain control of Marcus's mining operations, defense contracts, and rare earth mineral reserves. "It's a corporate assassination," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Graves is trying to have me killed so his company can steal mine." Agent Park was already reaching for his radio to coordinate with federal authorities, but before he could speak, the parking garage lights went out. Emergency lighting kicked in a moment later, casting everything in a red glow that made the concrete space feel like the inside of a tomb. "Generator's been cut," Detective Santos said, drawing her weapon and scanning the shadows. "Someone's in the building." The sound of footsteps echoed from the stairwell, multiple people descending. With military precision, Agent Park gestured for Marcus and James to take cover behind the armored vehicles, while his tactical team positioned themselves for a defensive engagement. "Federal agents," a voice called out from the stairwell. "We're here to extract Marcus. Wellington under orders from the Department of Justice." Agent Park frowned, speaking quietly into his radio. "Control, this is Park. Do we have any DOJ extraction teams in the area?" After a moment, he shook his head grimly. "Negative. Control has no DOJ operations authorized for this location." The footsteps continued descending, and Marcus could see the beams of tactical flashlights cutting through the red emergency lighting. Whoever was coming down those stairs, they weren't federal agents. "Mr. Wellington," the voice called again, closer now. "Senator Graves sends his regards. He wanted us to deliver a personal message before we complete our contract." Marcus felt ice water in his veins as he realized that Graves's reach extended far beyond what any of them had anticipated. Even from federal prison, the corrupt senator had been able to hire professional killers and coordinate their infiltration of a secure law enforcement operation. Agent Park made a series of hand signals to his team, and Marcus watched as federal agents took defensive positions throughout the parking garage. But as the fake DOJ team emerged from the stairwell, it became clear that they were outnumbered and outgunned. The men descending into the garage wore authentic-looking federal agent gear, complete with DOJ identification badges and standard-issue weapons. But their movements were too coordinated, too aggressive, and their eyes held the cold calculation of professional killers rather than law enforcement officers. "Stand down," the lead imposter commanded, his weapon trained on Agent Park. "We're taking Wellington into federal custody for his own protection." "Like hell you are," Detective Santos replied, her own gun drawn but clearly recognizing that they were at a significant tactical disadvantage. Marcus made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. He stepped out from behind the armored vehicle, his hands raised but his voice strong and clear. "I'm Marcus Wellington," he announced. "If Senator Graves wants to deliver a message, I'm here to receive it." The lead imposter smiled, but it was the kind of smile that belonged on a predator closing in for the kill. "Senator Graves wants you to know that your testimony cost him everything. His reputation, his freedom, his family's financial security. He lost his wife, his children won't speak to him, and he'll die in federal prison because of what you did." What I did was tell the truth," Marcus replied steadily. "Graves was stealing from the American taxpayers and destroying protected federal lands for personal profit. I testified because it was the right thing to do." "The right thing," the Satisur imposter repeated mockingly. "Do you know what happened to the senator's daughter after his assets were seized? She couldn't afford her insulin anymore, diabetic ketoacidosis. She died in a hospital emergency room while her father sat in a prison cell, unable to help her." The words hit Marcus like a physical blow. He remembered Senator Graves's daughter, Rebecca, a sweet 14-year-old girl who'd attended several political functions with her father. The idea that she'd died because of financial hardship resulting from her father's conviction was almost too horrific to process. "I didn't know," Marcus said quietly. "If I had known she needed medical care, I would have helped." "Would you?" The imposter's voice dripped with skepticism. "Or would you have done what you always do? Let your lawyers handle it. Keep your hands clean. Maintain plausible deniability while people suffer and die because of your choices." Marcus thought about Emma Stevens, the 8-year-old girl who died from contamination caused by his mining operation. About David Chen, lying in a coma because he'd become a target through his association with Marcus. About Rebecca Graves, dying in a hospital because her father's corruption conviction had left her family impoverished. How many lives had been destroyed by the ripple effects of his business decisions and moral choices? "You're right," Marcus said, his voice carrying a weight of shame and responsibility that surprised everyone in the garage. "I've spent my entire life making decisions that affected other people's lives, and I've been too removed from the consequences to understand the real human cost." Emma Stevens, Rebecca Graves, David Chen, all the families affected by the Henderson contamination. Their blood is on my hands whether I intended it or not. Agent Park looked at him with alarm. "Mr. Wellington, don't say anything that could be used against you in court." But Marcus ignored the warning, stepping closer to the imposter. "If Senator Graves wants me dead because of what happened to Rebecca, I understand his motivation. But killing me won't bring her back, and it won't undo the damage that's already been done." The imposter studied Marcus's face, searching for deception or manipulation. "What are you proposing?" "I'm proposing that we end this cycle of revenge and death," Marcus said firmly. "I'll turn myself into federal authorities and confess to every crime my company has committed. I'll liquidate my personal assets to establish compensation funds for every family that's been harmed by my business practices, and I'll accept whatever prison sentence is appropriate for my actions." James stepped forward, his face pale with shock. "Uncle Marcus, you can't do this. You'll lose everything." "Everything I built was constructed on other people's suffering," Marcus replied, never taking his eyes off the imposter. "Maybe it's time I faced the real cost of my success." The imposter lowered his weapon slightly, uncertainty flickering across his features. "Senator Graves won't be satisfied with financial compensation. He wants you to suffer the way he's suffered." "Then let him watch me lose everything I've ever cared about," Marcus said. "Let him see me spend the rest of my life in a federal prison, knowing that I destroyed my own legacy and broke my family's heart. That's a more complete revenge than a quick death could ever provide." For a long moment, the parking garage fell, silent, except for the distant sound of sirens and emergency vehicles. The imposter stood motionless, his weapon still drawn, but no longer pointed directly at Marcus. Agent Park and his team maintained their defensive positions, but nobody moved to escalate the confrontation. "There's one more thing," Marcus continued. "Lucy Martinez, the little girl who saved my life this morning by warning me about the poisoned coffee. She and her mother deserve protection and compensation for what they've been through. Whatever happens to me, I want assurance that they'll be safe and financially secure for the rest of their lives." The imposter's expression softened almost imperceptibly. "The kid who blew up Catherine's plan. She showed more courage than any adult in this situation," Marcus said. "She risked her own safety to save someone she barely knew because it was the right thing to do. If there's any justice in this world, she deserves a better life than what I can give her." Detective Santos stepped forward carefully. "We can arrange protection and financial security for the Martinez family, but this standoff needs to end peacefully. Nobody else needs to die today." The imposter looked around the parking garage, taking in the federal agents, the bomb disposal equipment, the evidence of a conspiracy that had already claimed multiple lives. "Senator Graves is going to be disappointed," he said finally. "He wanted you dead, not repentant." "Sometimes disappointment is better than more bloodshed," Marcus replied. "Tell the senator that I'll accept responsibility for my role in Rebecca's death. Tell him that I'll spend whatever time I have left trying to make amends for the damage I've caused, and tell him that I'm sorry for the pain my testimony brought to his family." The imposter slowly holstered his weapon, and Marcus felt the tension in the parking garage ease slightly. "This isn't how these operations usually end," the man admitted. "Maybe that's because most targets don't survive long enough to take responsibility for their actions," Agent Park suggested, his own weapon still drawn but pointed toward the ground. Over the next hour, as federal agents took the fake DOJ team into custody and bomb disposal experts finished securing the area, Marcus found himself sitting in the back of an ambulance while paramedics checked him for injuries. The events of the day felt surreal, like a nightmare that had stretched across multiple lifetimes. James sat beside him, his face still pale from shock and fear. "Uncle Marcus, are you really going to confess to all those crimes? Are you really going to give up everything?" Marcus looked at his nephew, seeing his own father's eyes staring back at him with disappointment and concern. "James, everything I thought I knew about my life turned out to be built on lies and other people's suffering. The money, the success, the respect, all of it came at a cost I was too selfish to acknowledge. But what about the good things you've done? The jobs you've created, the charities you've supported, the people you've helped? The good doesn't erase the bad," Marcus said quietly. "Emma Stevens is still dead. Rebecca Graves is still dead. David Chen is still in a coma. If I can prevent other families from suffering the same losses, then losing my fortune is a small price to pay." Detective Santos approached the ambulance, her expression tired but relieved. "Mr. Wellington, we've secured the area and taken all the suspects into custody. Jennifer Chen is cooperating with investigators and providing information about the conspiracy. Margaret Stevens is in federal custody, awaiting charges related to the explosive device, and the fake DOJ team is being processed through federal facilities." "What about Senator Graves?" Marcus asked. "He's being transferred to maximum security isolation while federal prosecutors build additional charges against him. Conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, continuing criminal enterprise. The list is going to be extensive." Detective Santos paused, studying Marcus's face. "Are you really planning to confess to environmental crimes and financial fraud?" Marcus nodded slowly. "I'm planning to tell the truth, whatever the consequences might be." 3 months later, Marcus Wellington stood in a federal courtroom in downtown Los Angeles, facing Judge Harrison Blackwood as he entered guilty pleas to 17 counts of environmental fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. The man who had once controlled a business empire worth billions of dollars now wore a simple gray suit and spoke in a voice barely above a whisper as he accepted responsibility for crimes that had caused immeasurable human suffering. In the gallery behind him, he could see Rosa and Lucy Martinez sitting in the front row. Lucy had grown taller in the months since she'd saved his life, and her eyes held a wisdom that seemed far beyond her 8 years. They were financially secure now, thanks to the compensation fund Marcus had established before liquidating his assets. And they were living in a safe neighborhood under assumed names that would protect them from any lingering threats. James sat in the second row, his face a mixture of sadness and pride as he watched his uncle accept the consequences of his actions. Wellington Enterprises had been dissolved, its assets distributed among compensation funds for environmental victims employee severance packages, and charitable organizations focused on environmental cleanup and healthcare for contamination victims. Senator Harold Graves watched the proceedings from his maximum security prison cell via closed-circuit television, his own sentencing for the assassination conspiracy scheduled for the following week. The death of his daughter Rebecca had driven him to seek revenge that ultimately cost him any chance of seeing sunlight again before his death. As Judge Blackwood announced Marcus's sentence, 15 years in federal prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years, Marcus felt a strange sense of peace. For the first time in his adult life, he was facing the real consequences of his choices without lawyers or money to shield him from accountability. "Mr. Wellington," Judge Blackwood said solemnly, "before this court proceeds to sentencing, do you have any final statement you'd like to make?" Marcus stood up, his legs unsteady but his voice clear. "Your Honor, I want to apologize to every family that suffered because of my company's actions. To the Stevens family, the Chen family, the Graves family, and the 47 families affected by the Henderson contamination. I can't bring back the children who died or heal the people who were injured, but I can ensure that the rest of my life is dedicated to preventing other families from experiencing the same losses." He turned to face the gallery, his eyes finding Lucy Martinez's earnest face. "I also want to thank Lucy Martinez, whose courage in telling the truth saved my life and opened my eyes to the real cost of my actions. She showed me that doing the right thing sometimes requires risking everything you have to protect people you barely know." As the bailiff prepared to escort Marcus to begin his prison sentence, Lucy stood up in the gallery. "Mr. Wellington," she called out, her small voice carrying clearly through the courtroom. Judge Blackwood looked surprised, but gestured for her to continue. "I forgive you," Lucy said simply, "and I hope you can forgive yourself someday too." Marcus felt tears streaming down his face as he was led away to begin his sentence. The little girl who had saved his life by warning him about poisoned coffee had just given him something even more valuable: the possibility of redemption. 5 years later, Marcus Wellington was granted early release for good behavior and his extensive work with environmental cleanup programs within the federal prison system. He emerged into sunlight wearing the same gray suit he'd worn to sentencing, carrying nothing but a small bag of personal belongings and a letter from Lucy Martinez, now 13 years old and an honor student at a prestigious private school funded by his compensation trust. The letter was simple. "Dear Mr. Wellington, I heard you're getting out of prison soon. Mama and I wanted you to know that we're doing well, and we hope you are too. If you ever want to visit us, you know where to find us. We'll always have coffee ready, the good kind that isn't poisoned. Your friend, Lucy." Marcus Wellington, former millionaire businessman turned federal prisoner, turned environmental advocate, stood on the steps of the federal correctional facility and smiled for the first time in years. He had lost his fortune, his reputation, and 5 years of his freedom, but he had gained something more valuable than any of those things: the knowledge that he could choose to do the right thing, even when it cost him everything. The battle that had started with a little girl's warning about poisoned coffee had ended with the possibility of genuine redemption. And as Marcus walked toward the bus stop that would take him to his new life as a free man, he carried with him the lesson that Lucy Martinez had taught him. Sometimes the most important thing you can do is tell the truth, no matter how much it hurts. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.